Good Saturday afternoon now to you, my beloved. This is Bible Billy O calling out to you from Detroit Diesel. I'm sporting my super cool, don't you think it's cool? A little face bandana. And I'm happy today. Well, actually, I have joy today. You know, there's a difference. And that reminds me of the old song, Ren and Stimpy, happy, happy, joy, joy. No, we're not going to go there. But there is a difference. Happiness is, although it's a blessing, happiness, it's based on the root word happy, which is happenstance. We get that word from that. Means that it comes and goes based on circumstances, based on right behavior sometimes. And it's a blessing to be happy. But joy is something that is altogether different, and it springs up. I heard someone once say joy is a byproduct that just automatically it bubbles up effervescently because of right living with God and others. And there's a passage I just wanted to read before I have to run into work. It's from John chapter 15, and I've touched on this one before, but it's going to tie into a little devotional thought I had this morning. And it's talking about the true vine, and that is Jesus. He is the true. He's verily, very the truth, the life, the way. He has also called himself the vine. And my Father, he says, is the vine dresser. Every branch of mine that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And he talks about pruning, and he talks about how it can be a painful process sometimes to undergo the wine dresser's pruning, even when there's suffering and loss. But there can be a joy that springs up even in the midst of some pain and suffering. The one verse I wanted to look at is verse 7. It says, "If you abide in me, and my words abide in you," and abide is a nice word that can also be used, the word remain with me. It's more than just visiting a place, it's living there. Abide in me, and my words abide in you. Ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. And that can be misused and sometimes taken out of context as well, as people will say, well, I can ask whatever I want. It's interesting, he says, the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commands, the last thing that he told you to do, what is it that Jesus has said? To love him with all your heart, soul, mind, and abide in my love. He goes on to connect joy, and I'm not seeing it because I've got my tiny Bible here and I can barely read it. But he talks about your joy being complete, and that you can have his joy, the actual joy of Jesus, if you abide in him and continue to remain connected. Well, that reminded me of a book that was written by a woman who was in an actual Nazi Germany concentration camp. Her name was Corrie ten Boom. Corrie, I think, short for Cornelia. Vincent's step sister was named Cornelia, and that's a beautiful Holland name. She's a Dutch woman, and her family actually used to hide Jewish people who were hiding from the Nazis in the wall, and she wrote a book later, and it was a great movie called Hiding Place. And in the book, she talks about how her and her sister, I think it was Betsy, were also taken to this concentration camp when they were discovered for hiding and trying to save as many Jewish people as they could. They were Christians, and they just thought, it's the right thing to do, even if I have to lie to these soldiers that no one's here when they really were. And that gets into a whole different moral argument. But she was actually put in a concentration camp, and there's one story where her sister and her praised the Lord because they had lice. They developed lice because it kept some of the guards away from them. They had been known to rape some of the women that were in the camp. But she also wrote a book called No Good If Detached, and that goes to this John chapter 15. Stay in me, remain, abide in me, and you'll bear much fruit. You're no good if you're detached. He goes on to say, if you are detached, apart from me, you can do nothing. Watchman Nee goes on to say, well, that means you can do everything when you are attached to him, but nothing of any lasting value. And getting back to this joy topic, That's a powerful force, joy, just like the force of forgiveness. I would argue with the scientists who say the most powerful force in the universe is a hypernova. I believe it's forgiveness. And there's a story about how she was preaching one day after she had been released. Her sister, unfortunately, died in the camp. And she was on a preaching engagement, preaching about forgiveness. And after this sermon that she gave, this teaching, a man came up to her, and as he was starting to get closer to her, she recognized him. And immediately she said, "Oh my goodness, this is one of the soldiers from the Nazi camp." He had somehow managed to get out of the war and get his life together, and actually became a Christian. But he had listened to her message, and he was walking up to Corey, and she recognized who he was, and all these emotions started to flood up. And he spoke to her, and she didn't really know what to say at first. He said, "I am a Christian now," he said, "and I came here because I knew you were speaking." And he said, "I need your forgiveness." Now, a lot of people would say, "Well, I'll never forgive this person." He was partly to blame for her sister's death and the atrocious things that they did. And at any rate, he put out his hand and he said, "Would you please forgive me?" He said, "I'm so sorry for all that I've done." And she said it was something that she just got done preaching about God's love and forgiveness being unconditional. And yet she said everything inside of her was against forgiving him, let alone touching him. And she said mechanically, almost woodenly, I raised my hand because she said it's an act of the will. No matter what the temperature your feelings are, feelings can be notoriously wrong. But the will can say, "I forgive, I choose to forgive." And she said, and I stretched out my hand. She said, I felt a current like electricity coming from my shoulder all the way to my hand, and she felt the warmth of his hand. And she said it was one of the most beautiful experiences. She sensed the love of God. Total forgiveness. She said, of course I forgive you, my brother. I forgive you with my whole heart. And this is a true story. It's written in one of her books, a memoir. Corey ten Boom. And of course, this man, such a burden was lifted off of him because he got her forgiveness. He had also been forgiven in God. But for those of us, and the world's ways are not God's ways, we would say, well, I would never forgive that person, the terrible things they've done. Well, think about how much we've been forgiven by God. It ought to bring joy to our lives. I'm not driving up north to go have a wonderful weekend, but I'm driving to work, and I'm actually filled with joy. And Jesus said, "You'll have my joy." And joy can be sometimes unspeakable, and you can't figure it out. But that's okay. So we have joy as a direct result in abiding, and I posted that on my Facebook today. I hope you get a chance to read. There's so many scriptures that talk about how we can have abiding, remaining joy no matter what we're going through. And forgiveness ties into that, understanding we're forgiven. And it's a process many times to forgive others. We have to acknowledge that we've been hurt first. We have to forgive ourselves for feelings perhaps we've had for vengeance. And it doesn't mean we forget the offense, but we can set up good governance so that it won't happen again, whatever's happened to you. But we can forgive them. And if you don't have an opportunity to go to that person who's hurt you by word or deed, you can, through God, say, "God, I release this person. I forgive them. Won't you help me to just not harbor this in my heart?" Because bitterness and resentment and unforgiveness is literally a cancer inside of many people, and some go to their deathbed with that, and I wouldn't want that on my worst enemy. So be free from that and have joy today. I call you blessed. I got to run into work now. Y'all have a wonderful Saturday. I love you in the Lord.